Hello guys, welcome back to Amstein TV. In today's video, we are going to be talking about Swahili civilization, that is the Swahili secret, all about ancient DNA reviews when Asian ancestry was introduced to East Africa. And that is how we are going to discover many happenings with the DNA findings. So stay tuned and hear what the Swahili civilization is all about. Findings clarify and complicate understanding of Swahili history. Who were the people of the medieval Swahili civilization? That is a big question. Ancient DNA reviews African founders intermingled with migrants from Southwest Asia around 1000 CE. Findings complicate scientific views as well as colonial era beliefs. For the first time, analysis determined that some present day Kenyans who identify as Swahili are genetically very different from medieval residents of the same region, while others have retained substantial medieval ancestry. While set toy and knights jousted in Europe and samurai and shoguns rose to power in Japan, the medieval peoples of the Swahili civilization on the coast of East Africa live in multicultural coral stone towns and engage in a trade network spanning the Indian Ocean. Archaeologists, anthropologists, and linguists have been locked in a century long debate about how much people from outside Africa contributed to Swahili culture and ancestry. Swahili communities have their own histories, and evidence points in multiple directions as we are going to be looking at it. The largest yet analysis of ancient DNA in Africa, which include the first ancient DNA recovered from members of the Swahili civilization, has now broken the stalemate. The study reveals that a significant number of people from Southwest Asia moved to the Swahili coast in medieval and early modern times and had children with the people living there. Yet, the research also shows that homemates and hallmarks of the Swahili civilization predated those arrivals. Archaeological evidence overwhelmingly showed that the medieval Swahili civilization was an African one, but we still wanted to understand and contextualize the non-local heritage, said co-senior Otto Chaporoka Kosimba, professor of anthropology at the University of South Florida. Taking a genetics pathway to find the answers took courage and opened doors beyond which lie answers that force us to think in a new ways, he said. The analysis, published recently in the journal Nature, included the newly sequenced ancient DNA of 80 individuals from the Swahili coast and inland neighbors dating from 1300 CE to 1900 CE. They also included new genetic sequences from 93 present-day Swahili speakers and previously published genetic data from a variety of ancient and present-day Eastern Africa and Eurasian groups. As it stands at this point, the international team was led by Simba and David Rich, professor of genetics in the Blackstanic Institute of Harvard Medical School and professor of human evolutionary biology at Harvard University. Let's look at mixing between Asia and Africa as Swahili civilization is concerned. The study revealed that around 1000 CE, a stream of migrants from Southwest Asia intermingled with African people at multiple locations along the Swahili coast, contributing close to half of the ancestry of the analyzed ancient individuals. The result provides unambiguous evidence of ongoing cultural mixing on the East African coast for more than a millennium, in which African people interacted and had families with immigrants from other parts of Africa and the Indian Ocean world. The study confirmed that the bedrock of Swahili culture remained unchanged even as the newcomers arrived and Islam became a dominant regional religion, set Kusimba, the primary language, tomb architecture, cuisine, material culture, and matrilocal marriage, residence, and matriarchal kingship remain African and Bantu in nature. The findings contradict one widely discussed scholarly view, which held that there was little contribution from foreigners to Swahili peoples, the authors said. Research also reveals that the findings also refute a diametrically opposed viewpoint prevalent in colonial times, which held that Africans provided little contributions to the Swahili towns. Ancient DNA allow us to address a long-standing controversy that could not be tested without genetic data from these times and places. So, researchers have also found out that the initial waves of newcomers were named and mainly from Persia. These findings align with the oldest Swahili oral stories, which tell of Persian, that is the Shirazi merchants or princes arriving on the Swahili shores. It was exciting to find biological evidence that Swahili oral history probably depicts Swahili genetic ancestry as well as cultural legacy. Research has put it forth that fellow in genetics in the lab, Brill, co-first author of the paper with Stefan Winnie. After about 1500 CE, ancestry sources became increasingly Arabian. In later centuries, intermingling with other populations from Asia and Africa further changed genetic makeup of Swahili coast communities. Now we see ancestry contributions from women from India. How did they contribute to the Swahili civilization? Analysis also showed that the initial stream of migrants had about 90% ancestry from Persia men and 10% ancestry from Indian women. Although South Asian associated artifacts are well documented at Swahili archaeological sites and Indian words have been integrated into Swahili, no one had previously hypothesized an important role for Indian people in contributing to the populations of the medieval Swahili towns as seen. Then we move to extreme sex differences in genetic contributions. Let's look what part genetics is playing here in the Swahili civilization. The predominant groups that contributed to Swahili coast populations during the initial influx in 1000 CE were male Persians and female Africans. Similar genetic signatures of sex imbalances in other populations around the world sometimes indicate that incoming men forcibly married local women, but that scenario does not align with the contract and the tradition of matriarchal Swahili societies. A more likely explanation is that Persian men allied with and married into local trading families and adopted local customs to enable them to be more successful traders. Their hypothesis is supported by the fact that the children of Persian fathers and Swahili coast mothers passed down the language of their mothers, and that the region's matriarchal traditions did not change even after locals settled down with people from traditionally patriarchal regions in Persia and Arabia and practiced the Islamic religion of their male ancestors. We look at genetics and identity. The research found that the proportion of Persian Indian ancestry has decreased among many people of the Swahili coast in the last several centuries. Many among those in present-day Kenya all identify as Swahili and had their genomes analyzed were genetically very different from the people who live in the region during medieval times, while others retain substantial medieval ancestry. So this result highlights an important lesson from ancient DNA, while we can learn about the past with genetics, it does not define present day identity. As we see decolonizing history here, in addition to helping to diversify the populations included in ancient DNA research, the study pushes back against a profoundly difficult history of more than 500 years of colonization in this region of Africa, which continues to be a major problem today. The story of Swahili origin has been modeled amongst and almost entirely by non-Swahili people. As we can see, the story result contradict and complicate narrative advanced in archaeological, historical, and political circles. Said Kosimba, who has spent 40 years working to recover the Swahili past and to address injustice experienced by descendants of the Swahili civilization. And that is it about the Swahili civilization, what we have gotten when it comes to ancient DNA reviews when Asian ancestry was introduced to East Africa. And what have you to say, guys? Share your own points of views in the comment section about what you know concerning the Swahili civilization. Thanks.